Hey everyone, I'm so happy you all have joined me here. My name is Massrat. I'm an educational psychologist and career counselor from Ahlam Training and Higher Education Services. Today we are going to talk about two topics. Number one, how do we choose a career? And number two, what are the different careers in mental health? So stay with me. If you have any questions, you can ask me in the chat. Go on putting your questions, and I will come to your questions at the end of my presentation. Okay, now when we are talking about careers, the most important thing is about self-awareness, or how do we know ourselves better. Okay, so self-awareness is that as a person and as an individual, who are you? What makes you different from others? How do you stand out from the rest? So, self awareness is the psychological term, but in simple words, it means that when you're highly self aware, you can evaluate yourself. You know your values, you know what's important to you and what is not, and understand correctly what you should do and what you shouldn't. Now, if you don't have that self awareness, don't panic because it is half the population in our world, including more adults than children, who do not have self awareness. So I'm leading you there. And once you have that idea of what self awareness is, I think you should be able to know what career probably you want to go for. Okay, so let's dive in and let's see. Now, on our path to becoming self aware, how many of us can answer these questions? So have a close look at these questions. Now here, I will answer these questions for myself so you get an idea. Do you know your potential? Absolutely yes. If I go after something, I can change things 100%, or learn something 100%, or complete a task. So I think I have the potential to change things in my own way. What are your strengths? Too many to name them here, but I'm extremely hardworking. I'm smart. I figure things out very quickly. I can influence people easily, as I'm doing now with you guys. So, those are my strengths. What are your talents? I can write well. I'm also a good cook. I'm also quite organized, especially with my time. I can speak well, as you all can see. And I have kindness inside me. And I see that as my talent because that's something that has helped me become successful in my profession. Do you have a plan for future? Absolutely. I know exactly what I'm going to do in next 10 years. What are the things about yourself you need to work on? Plenty of things I need to work on, and that's my plan for next 10 years. So, see if you can answer those questions to yourself. If you can, that's wonderful. If you cannot, then that's your homework to sit and think over it today. All right. So, let's see. Now, how does career affect your life decisions? How important do you think a career decision really is? So, choosing a career is the most important decision you will make in life. To start with, think about the amount of time we spend at work. That would be half your life. And if you're not happy with the work you do, it is going to affect your personal life too. If you land up in a wrong job, that will be wasting half your energy and hating the job. And that would do no good to your career or your life. So you will be stuck in a wrong place doing something boring, and this will affect you, your life, and your happiness. So you see, career decisions are actually extremely important decisions of our life. Now, what could be the reasons for choosing a career? Now, when I usually speak to my students, these are the reasons usually that my students give me. And When I ask, what do you want to study? So it's all boys, mainly, I want to be an engineer. All girls, mainly, I want to be a doctor. And the rest of others who are still confused, I want to be a lawyer. Now, there is nothing wrong in choosing those careers, but if you're choosing those options only because these are the only occupations you have heard of, then we are in serious problem. Or you're choosing a career, getting advice from others like distant relatives, neighbors. You're choosing the career because they want you to choose that, then again, you might end up in trouble. Or you want to take a subject because someone else is going to do that. Like your best friend decides to study business, and so you follow her into business school. Or because your uncle is a pilot and you have decided you should also be one, then you are going to be in serious trouble again. Or sometimes I get options like from my students, I want to become an actor. And why is that? Because there's a lot of money in it. But can you act? Do you have talent in you? Or I want to be an astronaut. Okay, so which country are you planning to work in? And the answer is Oman. So, do we have anything related to air and space right now in Oman? So, these are just examples that I'm giving you right now, but I have come across this from my students. So, let's look at what should be the steps in choosing a career. Now, the first step, as we talked about, is self awareness or to know yourselves better. Know what your interests really are. What kind of a person are you? Do you like working with people? Do you like working alone? Do you enjoy studying a lot? Or are you a person who likes doing things? Then, in that case, you need to enter a profession that requires less years. You need a coursework that is hands on and practical. So, based on what you want to study, then that determines what and where will you study. Which universities offer those courses? Decide on your resources. How much money and time are you ready to invest in it? See your family background. Where most likely will you go or start working after you finish studying? Which country will you be working on, for example, or working in? Is there a need of that profession in that country? So, for example, if you're going to study in the UK, but you will come back to work in Oman, is there a need for your profession in Oman? Is there a demand for the profession going to increase or decrease in next 10 years? So there are plenty of professions and jobs that might disappear in next 10 years because our world is changing so quickly. So you need to find that out. And then most important, meet someone who is already working in that profession. Interview them, ask them your questions, go and do some voluntary work if that is possible with them. Do a short online course if you have chosen a field before stepping in the long course of study. So, this will give you an idea if you really want to go in a field. Okay, so those were the steps. Now, if you haven't got a clear idea as to what career or what field you want to go to, uh, you do not have enough information about yourself or you haven't explored more options before you decide, then you do not have to worry because there is help available. All you have to do is take an assessment. A career assessment will give you all the information you need. It will give you the information about yourself. It will tell you what kind of personality type you have, whether you should go for careers that need long years of study or short, and it will help you explore all the different occupations before you decide on one. So it becomes a scientific measure where you can see things very clearly. And then you're not just making an assumption of yourself or making a choice just based on observation, but you're actually measuring yourself before you decide. So, this is what a career assessment would look like. So, Here you see the questions on the side. So these are the kind of questions which you will be answering on a career assessment like this. So there will be around 350 questions that you answer, which expose you to different occupations. Then the test compares your interest to the rest of the population, shows you where your interests lie, and then it gives you a range or the choice that best fits for you. So I do this assessment, and this is a career guidance process that I help students with. Once I do the assessment, these are the kind of results that I share with my students. And then from the choice that test gives us, we decide what would be some of the best options for them, considering their background, the place of study they want to go to, the resources that they have. So if you need help here with career guidance, you can arrange a meeting with me. On the next slide, I'm sharing my information with you. So you see here, my contact details are over here if you'd like to write to me and call me to schedule a career assessment. Now, those of you who would be going into any course, especially with scholarships, you need to be extra careful in choosing your subject. Are you going in the particular career only because you're getting a scholarship for that subject? Because then chances are high you probably will lose interest halfway through or not complete the course and lose your scholarship. So be wise and choose carefully. Okay, now we go to the second part of our talk today, that is careers in mental health. Now, with mental health, it has become specifically or extremely important this year. In context of COVID-19, COVID-19 has been the most disruptive event of our century. It has impacted all aspects of our life, even if the disease itself is brought in control in near future. We will continue to feel the impact it has left for quite some years. It has affected people in different ways, especially high level of stress, anxiety, depression, loneliness. Psychological well-being of people is affected. This psychological impact has been one of the worst, and people will continue feeling this long after we come out of this. Hence, mental health professionals are going to be extremely important in the near future. So, the professions in this field will be growing according to research, by 23 to 50% in next 10 years. So let's have a look at some of the mental health professions if you are interested in mental health that you can go for. Okay, so the first set of professions or occupations or careers that you see here are more from the science field. So if you're one of those who love science and medicine and would also want to combine it with mental health or psychology, then these are the options that probably you can look at. So neurologists do treat brain diseases. They are medical doctors. They specialize in medicine, but in neurology, and they treat people for disorders related to cognition or brain. So the three fields over here, that is neurologists, neurosurgeons, cognitive neurologists, and neuropsychologists, is all connected, and it's all to do with professionals who treat brain disorders. They are medical fields. They are the ones who do and prescribe medication for mental disorders. Now, psychiatry is a specialization again in medicine. So you go into the medicine field and you do a specialization in psychiatry. So they are medical practitioners who specialize in psychiatric medicine. They specialize in diagnosis and treatment of mental illnesses. So any type of mental illness are treated by psychiatrists. Now, if you have been thinking of going into nursing, but at the same time thinking of also mental health, so this is one of the short course of study. If you are interested in nursing and in mental health, you can combine those two interests over here and be a psychiatric nurse. Biopsychologists, they specialize in behavioral neuroscience. They apply principles of biology to study of genetics and developmental mechanisms of behavior. So they study animals and humans. So it's mainly a study of, you can say, brain and behavior. Careers with this specialization will lead you to work as a researcher. You can also teach as a psychologist, conducting animal research studies. So I would say if you're also interested in studying animals, you're interested in research, also interested in psychology, then you can combine all of that here for this profession. Engineering psychologists focus on studying humans and the products of equipments that we use every day. So relationship between man and machine, basically we can say. Engineering psychologist's job will be to understand products and technologies and how they are going to affect people, how to make those technologies and products safe. Also, well-being of people with that technology is one of the focus of their work. So today we are in this midst of technological age. So this field is really exploding. We have machines, computers, softwares. Everybody wants a device or a machine that is safe to use. So it is the job of engineering psychologists to make the products easier, safer, friendly, and more efficient to use. So here you will have to study, say, 4 years degree in general psychology, specializing in organizational or industrial psychology for your master's. That could have coursework which would look like human factor psychology, human computer interaction, and statistics. And with all of this, you should also have in your heart a love for engineering and machines. Okay. Then the last one over here is psychiatric technicians. That is, a psychiatric technician is an assistant to a psychiatrist. It's like a nurse or a nursing job, but the role is more extended than that of nurses. The job requires to keep patients under observation. You're caring for people in a psychiatric hospital or a residential setting, or you're working in an addiction or a treatment center. So their job is basically to provide people with therapeutic care, interact with patients, participate in their therapeutic activities, etc. So the study program again here is a short one. Immediately after high school, people who are interested in this would go for a psychiatric technology program. So it is a more of a vocational program for a year, and then you do an internship and you're ready for that job. Okay, so these were the jobs related to people who are more interested in science but also would want to work as a mental health professional. Now, on the second slide, I'm going to take you more towards psychology. Okay, so these are the professions that you see are related to psychology. So you can have a bachelor's in science and then go for your specialization in psychology. Or you could have a Bachelor of Arts, a Master of Arts in psychology, and this could be one of your specializations in psychology. So the first option over here, that is specialization that you can do in psychology, is clinical psychologists. Clinical psychologists are professionals who treat mental, emotional, and behavioral disorders. So clinical psychologists will use science of psychology to treat complex human problems. They have specialized training in diagnosis and psychological treatment. Clinical psychologists do work in clinics, in hospitals, or they could have their own private practice as well. Counseling psychology is an extremely wide field. The counseling psychologists again have a professional master's or a PhD in psychology, in counseling psychology, but they could specialize in different fields. Okay, so they provide assessments, diagnosis, treatments to help people using different therapeutic approach. This field specialization are so vast, and there are plenty of options here, like family and marriage therapy, counseling, rehabilitation, addiction, and list goes on. So you could specialize in any of those subfields with a counseling psychology degree. So a master's degree or a PhD in psychology is preferred. Then the next is educational psychology. School psychology, child psychologist, and developmental psychologist. This is all related because it's all related to specializing in children's problems. So studying with children and adults. Like, I'm an educational psychologist, so I work in an educational setting. I understand children's learning problems, behavioral problems, social problems. I work in a school setting. I work with schools and teachers and parents. So the main area of my work is diagnostic assessment, that is to help find out what could be wrong with children when it comes to their learning problems. I do psychological counseling in educational setting. And similarly, with child psychologists or developmental psychologists, they're looking at the same issues. They study children and psychological and developmental problems in children. So all of these fields are related. Then health psychologists are specially trained to help people deal with psychological and emotional aspects of health. So supporting people, say, who are chronically ill. They promote healthy lifestyle, encourage people to improve health and how they handle their illness. Health psychologists work in a variety of settings such as hospitals, medical centers, private clinics. They have programs like pain management, women's health, smoking cessation programs, etc. So these are the kind of programs they work on. And health psychology is a specialization in itself in a master's program that you have to take. Community psychologists look at problems holistically at a community level. So they are not very focused on individuals, but rather community psychologists will try and change things socially, culturally, economics, political environment, and they promote positive changes in health and empowerment. So community psychologists will work at a community level and systematically change community problems. So, for example, if there is a problem in community to do with teens engaging in dangerous activities or drinking or delinquent behavior, so community psychologists will set up or promote programs to educate young people of dangers of such behavior. So they work closely with community leaders to organize the communities and help those in need in the community. So that's to do with the community psychology. Okay. Now we will look at the professions with mental health in corporates, in organizations. Okay. Industrial organizational psychologist focuses on behavior of employees in the workplace. They apply psychological principles to help people in the workplace environment. So their job includes how to improve employee work performance, communication in the workplace, employee well-being programs, professional satisfaction of employees, and safety, etc. So industrial psychology is a specialization in the field of psychology. That is, you go in for a master's in industrial organizational psychology. And the growth in this field is going to be explosive with expected 13% growth by 2030. Now, all other fields that I have put down here are all related to industrial and organizational psychology. So you could go for subfield specializations from industrial and organizational psychology if you're looking for at other options under there. So the next is the consumer psychologists. The consumer psychologists are the one who get in the minds of the consumer, and it basically involves studying and researching consumer behavior. That is what influences people to purchase. Through groups and surveys, they will gather information on buying patterns of people, what consumer products will be successful, and what kind of preferences should be there in packaging, marketing of products, and all of that. Corporate therapists are basically clinical psychologists or counseling psychologists, but they are working in a corporate setting. So they design corporate wellness programs. They provide on-site therapy and counseling for employees. So they are in-house therapists for companies. Business psychologists will help people and organizations become more effective. So they use psychological principles and research methods to study people, workplace, and organizations and help them align their competing needs. Fashion psychologists is a relatively new and emerging field. And if you have a taste for fashion and at the same time you would want to do an academic course like psychology and study mental health, then this is where you can mix the two and combine the two. So they basically study how colors, images, style, and beauty affect human behavior. So, with their expertise, they help the fashion industry understand consumers and what will go well with the consumers. They also help individuals understand what should be the right fashion statement for them, their style, and according to their personality. And fashion psychology, there's a specialization coming up even for that. Human factor psychologists are basically engineering psychologists and are mainly, it's basically mainly the same field that I just talked about. Human factor psychologists will study how people interact with machines and technology. So human factor psychologists also work, say, with NASA. They facilitate human-centered design in designs of hardwares and softwares by supporting integration of humans with complex technical systems. So that's the job of human factor psychologists. Media psychologists, they study human interaction with media and technology. They study ways in which media influences human behavior. So they understand media technology. One of the biggest influence in our life right now is media. So this is an emerging and growing field. Media psychologists are studying more of digital media. This field of study, I would say, is a mixture of psychology and media technology. So you might need a bachelor's degree in psychology and then a different course in media, or a bachelor's in media and then a course in social psychology. So people do get a job with bachelor's degree in this field. They usually get a job with broadcasting companies, television, radio, movie studios. They might also find jobs in marketing and advertising firms. They also find work with schools and universities, helping them develop effective learning material. So that was mental health in corporates. Okay. Now let's look at the next field of psychology, which is more of experimental and research psychologists. Now, experimental and research psychologists, quantitative psychologists, all of these three fields are related because it's all to do with the research work. So they perform ongoing research in the field of psychology. Everything new we learn is from the hard work that the research psychologists study. So the progress in the field, I would say the entire field of mental health comes from here. That is, the growth depends on the research psychologists. So experimental and research psychologists will explore an immense variety of psychological phenomena ranging from learning to personality to cognitive growth. This is an extremely vast field. So depending on individual interest, people go to the subfields of study. So experiment and research psychologists work with usually universities for research work. They also teach. They work in research centers with governments, private businesses, etc. You need a master's and a PhD to be a research or experimental psychologist. Evolutionary psychologists are also researchers who try and understand humanity, but by examining specific traits that were passed on from our ancestors and how those influence our behavior today. It is a theoretical field, more based on assumptions than evidence. So it is a subfield of research psychology, and they would work in the similar fields as experimental or research psychologists would. Now we would go to mental health professions in specific fields. Okay, so if you see here, first is the military and defense psychologist. They work in armed forces, as the name goes. They work specifically for military personnel, for their mental and emotional health of military and army people. They treat problems such as stress, fatigue, post-traumatic stress disorder, etc. So military psychologists are psychologists, that is, they have a master's or a PhD in psychology, but for them to work in the military, they might also have to take military training. So similarly, military psychologists also get jobs in defense careers. Okay, so they work at all levels of defense in defense organizations. The next field, which is also emerging and is growing faster, is sports and exercise psychology. Now we have a complete specialization in sports and exercise psychology. So that is, you do a bachelor's in psychology, and then you go for your master's in sports and exercise psychology. So sports psychologists, they would work with athletes, teams, or coaches to improve their motivation and performance. They help the teams to deal with anxiety, self confidence, concentration, motivation. So they set up the activities to improve team and individual performance. They also support athletes in coping with injuries. They also do advice on team communication and therapeutic and health benefits of exercise. They also create exercise programs in organizations, workplaces, prisons, or psychiatric units. So they are employed not just only at sports arenas, but also at fitness centers, at healthcare centers, or prisons, and also organizations. Forensic psychologists will work with the police and the crime investigation departments to understand criminal behavior. They work alongside criminal justice system to evaluate criminals and study their mindset and motives at the time of the offense. So, for example, forensic psychologists will be working for, say, FBI. They would be the special agents for FBI investigating a crime. So, to be a forensic psychologist, you need a master's or a PhD in forensic psychology. Cyber psychologists, this is a developing field again, and again a growing field. They're also close to media psychologists, but their focus is mainly on internet and cyberspace. This field of study is emerging, more connected to artificial intelligence and virtual reality. The focus here is on how humans and technology interact with one another. So, cyber psychologists will mainly conduct research, investigate social media influence, study cyberbullying. They also study technology for virtual learning or technology addiction. They design treatment plans for addiction. They also work with companies that develop technology. So, say, for example, video game makers or a company that makes video games may employ psychologists to understand how to keep their players engaged, what the game should look like. They also use virtual reality environments as treatments to treat specific conditions such as phobia. So you might again need a bachelor's or a master's program in cyber psychology here. Next is political psychologists, that is dedicated psychologists who are understanding politics, politicians, and political behavior. So their work relates to voting, political party affiliations, law and government, also public perception of politicians. So they work very closely, mainly with political parties and politicians. They influence decision-making process and judgments made by politicians. They work for media outlets, federal agencies. They could also conduct research on voters. They also work with political leaders as their communications team, as part of their communications team. And growth in this field with the research that we see is average. It's not like an exploding field, but it's average. Transpersonal psychologists are psychologists who use traditional or spiritual practices to treat mental illnesses. Okay, so with that, we come to the subfields, or you would say these are not exactly mental health fields, but they could be short or small courses that possibly you can do if you are interested in mental health. Okay, so for example, therapist here. Therapist could be anyone who's using any form of therapy. So if there is a person, say, who is working in business, but at the same time is interested in doing some mental health work, so they could train themselves on any kind of specific therapy. So for example, hypnotherapy. So I'm a business person, but at the same time, I'm interested in mental health, or I want to do a career change, or have a change of mind halfway through my course. So these are the options that could possibly lead you towards working in mental health field. So you could pick up one of the therapies, any of the therapies that you would, possibly want to master at or learn, and then start using that therapy to help people with mental health issues. Social workers also do mental health work, so that field again is connected with mental health. Occupational therapists are therapists basically who work with children and adults with sensory problems or sensory integration. So they do these exercises and different activities to help people improve in the way they perceive and receive information. They are not mental health professionals specifically, but it's a related field. So psychologists always work with occupational therapists, especially when it comes to children. Speech and language therapists are the ones who help people with speech and language problems. So again, not exactly into mental health, but a related field. Psychologists work closely with speech and language therapists, occupational therapists, especially child psychologists, educational psychologists. I work with a team of occupational therapists, speech and language therapists all the time. Now, special needs educators or special needs educational needs coordinators are teachers mainly in school, but they specialize in helping children who have learning problems or behavioral problems or social problems. So they help and teach children with different, I would say, mental health issues. So psychologists work very closely with teachers in schools, especially educational psychologists. Mindfulness practitioners. Mindfulness, one of the upcoming and growing fields. So anybody could be a mindfulness practitioners. Generally, psychologists go to train themselves as mindfulness practitioners, but anybody could train themselves as mindfulness practitioners if you are interested in helping people. So you take up a course that certifies you as a mindfulness practitioner. The course could be 6 months or 1 year long, and then you become a mindfulness practitioner and start helping people with different issues using mindfulness as a therapy. Psychological first aid practitioners, especially in context of COVID-19, there are schools, medical schools that offer these courses. They are short courses, a few months basically, or few weeks, where you learn basically psychological first aid as to how to help someone in a crisis situation. So crisis counselors, first aid practitioners, crisis intervention specialists, all of this is same, and these are short courses which anybody can do and start helping other people more in a social context. So with this, I think we come to an end. Now here we have just a few minutes left. I'll take your questions here. So quickly, if you have any questions, just put to me in the chat and I will take your questions here. From where we can get this career interest assessment, I have my contact details on there on my last slide, where you have my number and my email ID. You need to get in touch with me to arrange for a career interest assessment, and I can do that for you. Any other questions do we have? You can ask me anything related to mental health careers or how to choose the careers or anything at all that's on your mind. Was there any part that you didn't understand? You can ask me that too, and I won't mind repeating myself. So I don't see any questions coming. I'll just wait for a minute more and then we will close this session. Specific schools, universities offer specific programs in psychology. So you will have to look at what kind of specialization you want to do first. And then you will have to look at which universities are offering those specializations. So depending on where you want to study, you will have to look in that country which universities are offering. Not all universities offer all specializations that I did mention. You'll have to look which universities are offering which specializations and then decide where would you want to study. Any other question? So best way for you to know what career to pick, as I said, would be to do a career assessment. So if you're like, you're not very sure, you're still confused as to what field I should go on. So the most scientific way of moving ahead, knowing yourself, which career you want to go for, would be to do a career assessment. And so for that, again, my details are there. I'm a career counselor and I can help you do a career assessment that will show you basically what your interests are, what your personality type is, what would be the best options of careers for you, basically. Yeah. Any other question? We close. What are the best? I've got one question here. 1 minute. What are the best major you recommend? Oh, well, that would really be a very, very specific question to you. I mean, I gave a vast amount of information over here, and this is very wide, extremely wide. As you see, psychology is one of the fields that is so wide, and you could apply it in any of the other occupations and professions. So here, this will really, you'll have to sit and think what your personal interests are before you decide on the majors. But as I said, some of the best majors are, organizational psychology, clinical psychology, counseling psychology, depending also on where you would be studying and where you would want to work in context of the country where you would be working. Depending on that, you might have to see if there is a need for, other professions, as I said, with political psychologists or forensic psychologists or army psychologists. They are also needed, but at the same time, you'd have to put context over there. But generally, organizational psychology, clinical counseling are the ones which are most common, and you get a job easily in any place. Okay. Um, which is the best career platform in next decade? Next decade. Career platform in next decade. I don't exactly get your question, but I did say which career fields are growing, which is career organizational psychology, counseling psychology, anything to do with mental health, where you would be able to serve the community at large, will be growing. Post-COVID children are different. What is your observation? Post-COVID children are different. What is your observation? What do you mean by post-COVID children are different in terms of learning, in terms of behavior and social issues? Yes, there might be some of the changes that we will see in the learning patterns of children. Yeah, I got your question. So in terms of learning that you're saying, yes, there will be differences in learning. There will be behavior and challenges that we will see as children come back to school, because this has been a stressful period for everyone, for adults also. So for children, of course, and we would need different strategies, different interventions to attend to that. And this is why I said mental health professions will be at the forefront, whether it comes to schooling, whether it comes to children or adults. Mental health professionals will have a very important role to play in next 10 years. All right, so with that, we come to an end. Thank you so much for your attention. 21st century parenting. Of course, dear, with everything, as I'm saying, with everything, every part of the community, every individual is affected by this, and every group will need different sort of intervention to help them. So parenting is, of course. You can chat with me on my email or come to my WhatsApp on my number, and I will be able to guide you there. All right. Thank you so much for your attention. It was a pleasure to talk to you all, and I hope to see you all again soon. Goodbye.